Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope everyone's doing well and this video reaches everyone in the best of faith and belief. To all my Muslim brothers and sisters out there and to all my non-Muslim viewers, I greet you with the greetings of peace. I hope you're doing well. I hope everyone you know are doing well, and I hope your life's going wonderful. Anyway, today and a close friend of mine sent me a video about 9 chronic miracles that were debunked, and today we're gonna debunk this channel. Rationality Rules is debunks, so we're gonna debunk the debunk. Or I don't even know if that makes sense, but yeah, whatever. So let's jump right into the video and see what he has to say, because honestly I do think some things can be said about this and some aspects weren't taken into consideration. It was really interesting when I watched it the first time, so I thought I'd make a video about it because it's to spread awareness about it to everyone else.
Iron.
Right, so essentially the first claim that he made is that so God says in the Quran that water, sorry, I'd already kind of started the video without recording it and stuff, so I kind of watched a bit ahead, but we'll just start from there.
Water is essential for all living things. We all know that water is vital to life, but the Quran makes a very unusual claim. We made every living thing from water. Will they not believe? In this verse, water is pointed out as the origin of all life. All living things are made of cells. We now know that cells are mostly made up of water. For example, 80% of the cytoplasm.
Okay, in order to keep this video succinct, I'm going to exclude all that's unnecessary. And so in this case, the miracle is that the Quran claimed that all living things are made of water centuries before science proved as much.
The fact that living things consist mostly of water was discovered only after the invention of the microscope.
However, there are several critical flaws with this assertion, and the primary is that long before the advent of the Quran, many religions, cultures, and individuals had claimed the same. For example, the Hindu legend Varaha, which dates back to the 7th century BC, or 1,400 years before Islam, states that the universe, including life, was once primordial waters. And the father of philosophy and science, Thales of Miletus, in his search for what the Greeks called the arche, which means the beginning or the first principle, was convinced that it's water, that everything, including life, was ultimately made of water. And he referenced, among other facts, that flesh, when dried or cooked, loses moisture, and that water so easily transitions between the states of liquid, vapor, and ice.
Number 2.
Right, so before we move on to the other one, that first one that he mentions how centuries or hundreds of years before, or Islam had mentioned, or even the advent of Islam, civilizations and ideologies, philosophies had come up with the concept that all living things were made of water. That doesn't really work for two reasons. Number one, you have to consider the geographical location and the demographic that the Quran was sent down upon. And number two, you have to look at who the Quran was sent upon. And now let's discuss number one, the geographical location, why that's significant. So at the time of the Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, the great two superpowers of the time were the Roman Empire, which conquered quite all of the western part of the world, which is modern day western part of the world, and the Persian Empire, which conquered more of the east. But these two were the main two superpowers and empires in the world at the time of the Prophet. However, even though they could have very easily, conquered Arabia with all of their technological advancements, which they were way ahead in compared to the Arabs, who were still very primitive in their technological advancements, still fighting with a sword, etc. Whereas these people had come up with so much more like horse cavalry and like other weapons, etc. They could have easily, and cannons and whatnot, they could have easily defeated the Arabs had they so wanted to. And same with the Persian Empire, their military might was 10 times more than the Arab Empire, if not more. But just notice how these two great powers did not want to conquer Arabia because it was that insignificant to them, because it's just the modern day Saudi Arabia, or the Arabian Peninsula at the time, was such a desolate desert-like area where no life would grow and such primitive and uneducated people would live that there'd be no point in taking it over. So when you put that into perspective, there could not have been anyone in his demographic or in his clan or the people around him, the Quraysh, who could have taught him these ideologies about the Hindus or the Greeks, because they were so primitive and uneducated themselves. Heck, they were so primitive and uneducated that they used to eat dead animals, and they used to bury their daughters alive, and they used to do pilgrimage and around the holy house naked sometimes. So it can be said that their level of ignorance was very, very it was to an extreme, to a point, I would say. So there's no way that anyone from around him or his family who were on such primitive, primitive way of life, they could have taught him anything about all these other philosophies and stuff of. And number two, considering the person, and that the prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, he was actually unlettered. He didn't know how to read or write, so he could not have learnt it from any research himself, because he could not have read any books or any articles or anything, for that matter of fact, to have gained such knowledge. And that was for his whole 63 years of life. He did not know how to read or write, so he could not have written the Quran by hand, and he could not have researched or found out about these sciences or these philosophies or theologies prior to him having got the revelation from God. He would not have known this. It's through that he could not have he could not have used his own strength and abilities to do it, because he did not have it. And that's what God references in the Quran as a proof against people who make such claims. And also, considering the geographical location, the demographic of people that lived in Arabia at the time, how they were so ignorant, so primitive in their understanding and culture and way of life, I really highly doubt they would have known anything about such things, honestly. So there's no way. So those two things debunk how he would have even figured out about our water, all life coming from water. So the fact that he did say that all life come from water, from a man who was illiterate, coming from a background of people who were primitive, uneducated, and illiterate, where majority of the population did not know how to read or write, and only a minority of the very wealthy people knew how to read or write, even that. It's really just a surprise. Honestly, that's what makes it a miracle, considering the demographic of people where only the rich knew how to read and write, and even then there was so much ignorance to their understanding and ways of life. And him being an unlettered man is more than enough proof about why that's a miracle.
Iron. Iron is not natural to the Earth. It did not form on the Earth but came down to Earth from outer space. Scientists have found that billions of years ago, the Earth was struck by meteorites. These meteorites were carrying iron from distant stars, which had exploded. The Quran says the following on the origin of iron. We sent down iron with its great inherent strength and its many benefits for humankind. The fact that iron came down to Earth from outer space is something which could not be known by the primitive science of the 7th century.
Now, the first thing to be said about this miracle is that despite protestations to the contrary, people knew way before the 7th century that iron comes from meteorites.
Again, he's making the same claim about how people before Islam knew about how iron had come from outer space or had come down to Earth through meteorites or whatever means. Again, it's the same argument as last time. The Prophet could not have known that, and the guy actually mentions it because of primitive science of the Arab Peninsula at the 7th century, how uneducated, illiterate the demographic and the people were, and the Prophet being unlettered and uneducated himself, he could not have done his own research to find out that iron was sent down through meteorites, nor could anyone have taught him, because there was no one of that knowledge or no one who had that ability to travel. And not many Arabs actually traveled to Rome or Persia to do much trade. Even in the early 7th century, they just stuck to Syria, etc., right outside Rome, etc. So they would not have been able to gather that intel, and I don't really know where these claims come from. So I'm just gonna skip on for the sake of So he mentioned the Egyptians. The Prophet could not have known about the Egyptians. He just references hieroglyphics there, so there's no way he could not have known. And the hieroglyphics were long lost after the Romans took over Egypt. So just debunk.
Crucial role in protecting the Earth. If the sky did not exist, then the sun's radiation would have killed off all life on Earth. The Quran asks us to consider the sky in the following verse. We made the sky a protective ceiling, and yet they are turning away from our signs. The Quran points to the sky's protection as a sign of God. The protective properties of the sky were discovered by scientific research conducted in the 20th century.
So first off, while it's true that the ozone layer was discovered in the 20th century, the discovery that the sky has protective qualities was made thousands and likely tens of thousands of years ago.
Same thing as before, he's just asserting that the sky's protective layer or that miracle was asserted way before.
Mere observation yields that atmospheric phenomena, such as clouds, protect us from the sun's heat, and so the assertion that the sky has protective qualities isn't exactly miraculous, is it? Furthermore, the first culture that we know of to attribute the sky's protective aura to a god was the Mesopotamians, who worshipped the divine personification of the sky, Anu. Anyhow, doing other people's research for them is exhausting, and so for Miracles 4 to 7, I've acquired the aid of my good friend Drew, the genetically modified skeptic. And so, enjoy.
Right, so before we move on to the next miracle, again, this miracle is the same as the last two. The Prophet could not have known that because of his demographic, the Arab Peninsula, how primitive they were, and their understanding and knowledge, the huge unawareness and inability of the people to read and write, let alone even acquire such knowledge from other civilizations and ways of life. And the Prophet being unlettered himself, he couldn't have done that research to know that. So yeah, it's really just it's just the same thing over and over again. These people just assert this without looking at the whole picture, which kind of hurts me as well. I mean, fair enough if they said that this is our opinion or something, but they outright just say the Quran is just not miracles and stuff, and they're just being fully disrespectful to a way of life and a whole group of people that actually consider these miracles. That's what really bugged me. I'm like, why are you asserting that as fact? Like, that's very disrespectful. And if you're gonna do that, then by all means, please come at us, and we're willing to take the challenge. And that's what God asserted, that any challenge that's come through, the Muslims have prevailed to defend our faith, and we are willing and ready to do that if the time comes, and again and again. Anyway, going back to the next ones. These next ones should be a bit more interesting because it's from another person.
I know I sure will.
Steve, why did you rope me into this? Do you think I'm enough of a masochist to actually enjoy this kind of thing? I mean, I am, but at least next time warn me about how bad the claims are going to be. Jesus Christ. All right, let's just get on with the video.
Number 4, mountains. The Quran draws our attention to a very important characteristic of mountains. Did we not make the earth as a resting place and the mountains as stakes? The Quran indicates that mountains have deep roots by using the word stakes to describe them. In fact, mountains do have deep roots, and the word stakes is an accurate description for them. The fact that mountains have a deep stake, like roots, was not known until after the development of the theory of plate tectonics in the beginning of the 20th century.
First off, did you notice how the video immediately equated mountains being described as stakes with the idea that mountains have roots? Those are not the same thing. The word used in the original Arabic to describe mountains here means something like a tent stake, a bulwark, something to keep things stable. If you know anything about geology, you know that mountains don't act as stakes to keep the Earth's crust stable. Mountains are actually a result of tectonic plates colliding. They're a result of instability. If we take a look at where earthquake epicenters usually lie, we see that they're almost always located within mountain ranges. Mountains aren't much help in stabilizing the Earth's crust. Even if this isn't the intended meaning of describing mountains as stakes, and it simply meant that mountains are shaped like stakes due to their roots, the Quran is still wrong. Mountains are like icebergs, bulky masses of lighter material floating in heavier material. The majority of a mountain is below the surface, yes, but its shape is nothing like a stake or peg.
Thank you for clarifying and starting off one of my points, because you assert that the person in the video is claiming one thing straight away, jumping to conclusions, how you said, oh, can we just talk about how he just immediately asserts stakes with deep roots, and then you go on to assert and make claims about the exact same thing based on your own understanding. Like, where's the logic? Come on, you're literally being hypocritical here, double standards, whatever. But no, so anyway, that's fine. You want to play double standard games, that's fine, that's all right. Okay, I can play those games too, no worries. Anyway, so he mentions about how they're actually not shaped like steaks. God didn't say they have to be shaped like steaks. God just said they're like steaks. That could be in shape, that could be in function, that could be in anything, honestly. It doesn't even have to follow that it doesn't even have to necessarily follow that shape, that function, that whatever. Not necessarily. It can just have like similar connotations, or it's like, for example, when you say for something like a simile in the Quran, God uses simile. He uses the word like. Ka in Arabic is a particle used to show like similarities. For example, when you say that for example, if you say he ran like a cheetah, you're not saying he is now a cheetah or something, or you're not saying that his running has become a cheetah or something. Now, are you? You can say that he ran like a cheetah, meaning that how a cheetah runs quickly, that person is also running quickly, and also you're doing that to show more effect. Similarly, God uses similes for effect. It's not okay. Don't get me wrong. These are scientific miracles because these are proven by people from such a primitive time and era and demographic, but you have to also understand and take into context that the Quran isn't just a book of facts and science. The Quran, as God says, is a source of guidance. Hence why sometimes God may not be very explicit and just say, oh, the earth has an ozone layer, or the mountains are icebergs or something, because the Quran isn't just about spitting out scientific facts. Because belief isn't just purely based on science. Belief is based on something more than science, but science just corroborates the beliefs you already have. Do you get what I'm saying? It just adds to it, just builds on the faith you already have. It's not to say that our belief is dependent on science. That's number one. And number two, the Quran has many linguistic and the features, and the reasons why it might mention something in a certain way is because then it'll have a more of a moral impact on the person, because that's the main point of the Quran as a source of guidance rather than as just a book that spits science. So that's why sometimes the wording might be a bit like, oh, and he'll mention that if God wanted to say this specifically, and he'll mention that in the next miracle. Why didn't he just say it specifically? Well, because then he'd just be spitting facts, and that those spitting facts would have no morals to the thousands of generations that came before us in the Muslim empire, because they would not have known about it. And even to this day, just having facts, scientific facts just spitted at us in the Quran just doesn't really have a moral guidance. And every single verse God's in it picked in the Quran is supposed to have some form of moral guidance. For example, when you compare, just as an example, an analogy, when you compare the biblical narrative and the Quranic narrative of the story of Joseph, if you'll notice that the Quran may omit certain elements of the story. For example, or it'll omit the parts of the story of Joseph or Yusuf alayhi salam, which is the Arabicized version of his name. His childhood, his infancy, it'll skip that because that doesn't have any moral benefit on the reader. It'll just jump straight from the part of the story to when he had the dream and he tells his father in his latest childhood, you can say, because that's where the moralistic part of the story begins. And then you'll see so many other details that are skipped out in the story, etc., and they have to be explained later on. They're not in the direct Quranic words because, well, it doesn't necessarily serve the moral and purpose that God's trying to say. So that's why that's why it's mentioned as stakes. And number two, he makes mention of the Quranic wording. So let's just have a look at what the Quran has to say about that. So the brother quoted that verse.
Bulky mass. Anything about geometry?
And the word stakes is the Quran indicates.
So the surah is 78 verse 67, right? So let's go to surah 78 verse 67. 78 verse 67. 6 to 7. Okay, let's just go on 6 for the sake of it. Sorry, bless. Mind me. Waljibala autada. Okay, this is why he mentioned the word autad, and he made the mountains ألم نجعل الأرض مهادا. Do not, have we not smoothed out the earth? Okay? And then وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا, and the mountains as pegs, right? He doesn't make mention of the car, but that's implied because of Arabic grammatical things. And so the mountains as pegs, that's like the state of what they are. They're like pegs. So autad, let's search that up in the dictionary and see what we get for that. Okay? This is a very classical, well accepted Arabic dictionary, hence why I'm just looking through it. 1 second. If I can find a PDF of it anywhere. Okay, forget it, that's fine, no worries. What is meant by, let's just search up Google Translate. Google Translate provides enough. Autad. Stakes. Let's get the definition of stakes. A strong wooden or metal post with a point at its end, driven into the ground to support a plant, form part of a fence, and make a boundary. A metal worker's small anvil, typically with a projection for fitting into a socket on a bench. Support a plant with a stake or stakes. So it can mean to post. It can mean a post, it can mean a pole, it can mean a stick, it can mean whatever. It can mean upright, it can mean a support. Right. These are all the meanings of stake that could be implied here. Why should we just assume that it's just a stake or a pole? I mean, that well could be within what it's talking about. But by definition, a stake is a wooden or a metal post with a point at the end.
Word used in the original Arabic to describe mountains here means something. Mountains aren't the Quran, yes, but it.
So does this not have a point at the end? If you look at the basaltic layer, if you look at that, is that not like a little peg, like just sticking out into the ground? Is that not like an indent going into the ground? And by definition, it says that it has a point at the end. This mountain thing, this bottom part of the mountain, it has a point at the end. Right, yeah, so does that protrusion not by definition make that similar to a stake? It's something driven into the ground, it's in the ground, and it has a point at the end. Maybe it does not share the same function or purpose as a stake, that it supports the plant or whatever, but it still has the same like physical kind of anatomy, if you get what I'm saying. So that analogy still applies. It's still something that's with a pointy end in the air at the end, and it's enrooted into the ground. Now let's do a little bit more digging just to further prove my point. In a book by geophysicist Frank Press called Earth 1960, he explains how the mountains are like stakes and are buried deep within the Earth's surface. Exactly. The mountains are like stakes and they are buried deep within the Earth's surface. That's what I mean by stakes. Stakes, something that are just dug deep in. For example, he said like a tent peg or like something like that. Well, regardless of how you want to put it, whether you want to put it as the fence thing or a pole or a stick or a tent peg, all of those are dug deep into the ground and beneath the Earth's surface. And that's what can be said about the mountain. The mountain, layers of it is dug deep within the ground with a protruded ending, might I add into the Earth's surface, and that's what I could mean by stakes. So it still proves that the mountain are like stakes or pegs.
Its shape is
maybe not in his definition or not in his way, or maybe not by purpose, but by the physiological and by meaning, yes, I would say so. Now we're on to the expansion of the universe. Sorry, I skipped a bit ahead.
Quran. And it is we who have built the universe with our creative power and keep expanding it. The fact that the universe is expanding was discovered in the last century. The Quran mentioned the expansion of the universe even before the invention of the telescope.
Here is yet another product of interpretation with an agenda. The original Arabic seems to describe the subject of the verse, the builder, rather than describe an action. It also seems to refer to the sky, not the universe. Other common interpretations vary from the one shown here, often saying something like, "We built the heavens by our authority, and we are the Lord of power and expanse." Many interpretations don't support the description of an expanse.
Of the universe was described.
I see his point. He's trying to say that, well, we're just nitpicking at one specific interpretation, talking about that, not talking about other interpretations, etc., when that could be the one implied. Fair enough, good point. I agree with him there. So let's have a look. Because I don't want to be biased or anything. I want to do this
And it is
completely
we who
unbiased.
have built the universe with our creative power and keep
Right. Okay, so it's it's chapter 51, verse 47. Let's have a look at that. Let's just have a look at that, shall we? I use Quran.com because honestly, just beautiful. So what was it? It was 51:47. 51:47. So وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا. We built. So bana yabni وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا. This and the sky, the heaven, we built it. Ha, referring back to the sky, the word sama, بِأَيْدٍ, with great might. Yeah, with great might. وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. Okay, and we are certainly expanding it. Okay, so even when he says that about it refers to the more of the creator than the thing created, fair enough, because the wording here is musi'un, and that is in Arabic something known as ism fa'il. And for those people who are unfamiliar with the Arabic in syntax or Arabic grammar, that's basically just it's a noun derived from a verb. It's a bit of like a grammatical and syntax kind of discussion, but essentially it's, for example, like how in English we have to run, which is the verb, and you have runner, which comes from the verb to run. Someone who runs is called a runner. Similarly, musi'un, wasi'a is the verb to expand, and musi'un is and musi'un is the, what do you call it? Musi'un is the one who's expanding. Yeah, so I guess it does make sense when he says, and we are the Lord of power and expanse. Yes, but expanding what? Do you get what I'm saying? God, like, and verily we are the ones that are expanding. Yeah, well, that's just that's understood according to many well acknowledged interpretations of the Quran, like Ibn Kathir, Ma'arif al-Quran, and Tazkir al-Quran, and which are very well accepted and good commentaries of the Quran. Well, the God, and so he mentions this thing about the sky, which is correct in the literal linguistic sense. God does say the sky, we built it with power. I agree, but he's failing to consider that that the Quranic use of words and in the context that it's put, it does not mean just a sky. Actually, in the Quran, God refers to sky or skies. He sometimes uses plural, or to mean like levels of like creation, or like heavens or the universe, etc. For example, God also says was-samawati wal-ardi. One second, let me just pick out a verse, because honestly I don't want to quote random verses. That's very disrespectful. Okay, so in this verse, God says, الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فِرَاشًا وَالسَّمَاءَ بِنَاءً. He made the earth as a place of settlement and the sky as a canopy. Right? Sky as a canopy, as like a structure, building. There it means sky. like when it describes normal things about sky, then it will say yes, sky. But normally when it's used, for example, like to say things about sky and stuff, but when you're talking about the heavens, look, so when we talk about the heavens, God also says samawat. He uses the same word as the sky. The word sama, which means sky, is also used for the heavens. So we form the heavens into seven heavens. فَقَضَاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. We made them seven heavens. So the word sky can also be used in context to mean heaven. So why are we just assuming that it means sky? And in this context, if everyone said that it is translated to heaven, heaven, then who are we to just go and contradict that when we are not, like, people of that religion or have studied well into that? So that there means heaven, but heaven still doesn't mean universe. Well, you have to understand, in Islam there's a concept of, we believe in 7 layers as of I don't know, you can think of it like 7 layers or like 7 heavens. We believe in 7 heavens. Now here it doesn't literally refer to the actual like heavens. It could be like, it's more of like 7 layers of like 7 universes. Think of it like that. Because the prophet mentions that the first heaven is like a ring you put in a desert, and the desert is the second heaven. So he's trying to describe how the heavens are like universes. Think of it like that. They could be like parallel universes or something like that. Whatever. It's a very in-depth kind of phenomena. But regardless, it still proves that when it says wasama ألم نجعل الأرض مهادا والجبال أوتادا, and the mount sorry, no, the wrong ones, it's the wrong verse, but yeah, regardless, let me just pull up that verse again. So again, that just goes to show that that word about the sky can also mean heaven or a universe. That's not a wrong interpretation of that verse. That's very well within its right to be understood that way. Yeah, see, look, it says, and by the heavens in their marvelous design. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْحُبُكِ. The word sama is used, but it means heaven. So anyway, that does mean that, again, it just goes back to show that God is the one expanding it. Yes, because he's the one expanding. But what's he expanding? He's expanding it. It refers back to the thingy of that sentence. Because musi'un, you have to understand in grammar, the noun of a doing word. The noun of a doing word, it can also be used in the verbal meaning. For example, it can mean the verb. It can have the meaning of the verb. So when it says musi'un, it can also mean expanding. He's expanding, not the expander. Or he is expanding. And in that meaning, it would go back to the sama, which is the subject of that sentence. So again, it just goes to show that it can mean expanding.
A telescope.
Action. It also seems to refer to the sky, not the universe. Other interpretations don't support the description of an constantly expanding. He'd make it so clear that interpretations couldn't conflict on that point.
Again, he's mentioning how if he really wanted to make the point that the earth was expanding, he'd make it very clear. Well, it is quite clear, as I've shown. When you look at the Arabic and the grammar, it's quite clear as to what it's trying to say. Because Arabic has different syntax and grammar to the English language, so you have to understand it with that context in mind. And also, what I'd like to say is that, again, he just says, why doesn't he clearly say it? Because, well, he has clearly said it, number one, which I already just proved right now through the explanation. And number two, God's not going to just always go spelling everything for you, because obviously there's that level of, it's not just a book of scientific facts or scientific inventions or discoveries, it's a book of guidance. And as part of the guidance, it will mention certain things which will be proven later on in time as a miracle, as well as a guidance, or as something that humans didn't know at the time.
You know, it's as if the Quran is written by a fallible being. Huh.
This really gets me. He's making a snarky comment that it's as if the Quran's written by a fallible being. That's very, very highly disrespectful to all Muslims. Very, very. That's so disrespectful. Like, how can you disrespect a whole religion like that? That just really gets me. I don't like when people hate on something. Fair enough, express your views and stuff, but in a respectful manner. But don't hate on people. He just went up and said it's written by a fallible being, and the Islamic belief is that it's by God. So if you say that, you're basically just disrespecting all Muslims alike and just spreading this kind of hate. Why should we be spreading hate? Should we not be spreading peace and love amongst each other? But no. That's really annoying how he said that, so I don't really like how he did that. Well, anyway, this video's gone on long enough and I don't want to make it longer than it already is, so I'll just cut it off there. See you guys in the next video. Assalamu alaikum or peace. Bye bye.